Draft season is rapidly approaching, and I have put in so much time researching and finding out what is the best strategy if you are picking early on in the first round. This is actually going to be part one of a three-part series where I'm going to be going over different parts of the first round and where I'm drafting. Now in this video, I'm picking actually out of the 103, and I'm praying that my league mates are not watching this video. Now, as a disclaimer, I'm not telling you that this has to be the way that you have to do it, but I'm going to give you different scenarios so that way you have different approaches, knowing that every single league that we're a part in is very different. For those of you who are just like me, that are dads, husbands, have a full-time job, I've done so much research to help condense it and make life easy for you, so that way when it comes to your fantasy drafts, you are all prepared to dominate and get ready to win your fantasy football leagues. Now, before I go into those scenarios, I'm going to introduce a very valuable metric that I've been using for the last couple seasons to help me make my draft decisions, and it is wins above replacement. And the data I'm pulling this from is from Destination Devy. They are a great resource, and I'll be sure to link this into the video as well as into the show notes if you're listening to the audio portion of this podcast. And essentially what wins above replacement is, it's a great stat to measure the level of impact that your team has of winning, and it does this by essentially measuring and comparing different players in different positions and actually dictating the impact that they have for your team to actually be successful. And in this chart that I actually was able to get from one of my good buds, Rod Stewart, he reveals the breakdown round for round from rounds 1 through 10 and what the return on an investment is for this specific stat. So if you look at this chart over here, you're seeing in the first 3 rounds, you are more prone to actually be successful in drafting a running back as opposed to the later rounds between rounds 4 through 10. Now, the main thing I want you to focus on is here in these middle rounds between round 4 and round 6. You're seeing that from rounds 1 through round 3, the return is almost identical between positions of running back and wide receiver, but you see a huge gap in that 4th round where you're seeing a 0.5 win above replacement return on the running back position compared to 1.4 at the wide receiver position, which showcases the value that wide receivers are able to bring in this area. So the way that we're going to implement this in this first scenario where I'm picking out of the 103, I am actually here showing you that I'm drafting at a more balanced approach, being that I opened up my fantasy draft with CeeDee Lamb, and then I'm able to come back at the return of the end of the second round with Chris Olave. After that, I then couple my running back position with Josh Jacobs and James Cook. And for those of you that are wondering, why would I go for James Cook, being that round 4 typically is a dead zone? And there are so many pros as to why I'm targeting James Cook in this range. And it's really mainly because of the usage that he's getting in this Buffalo Bills offense. He's averaged 16 weighted opportunities per game. He averages 4.5 receiving targets as well. He's in a top 20 offense, and he's barely scratching 25 years old. And one more key thing about him is his efficiency. He was 5th in yards per touch, also was 3rd among running backs in expected points added, also known as EPA. And for that kind of upside in the 4th round, I am feeling really confident there. And as you can see in the 5th round, I then was able to get Kyle Pitts, and then I think I got a really strong steal there with Rashee Rice in the 6th round. And what I did was then is I went back-to-back running backs with Zamir White, who I've been raving about all offseason as well, to go along with Jaylen Warren. And then what I did was, towards the later rounds, as you can see, I was then able to get Christian Watson to then really close out my flex position. And then I was able to invest in quarterback with Jaden Daniels, being that he's going to already provide that running upside as a mobile quarterback. And to end the draft, I went with Chase Brown, someone who I believe is going to be a really good handcuff. And same thing with the last 3 picks. I also went with Sennett there to be more of a backup for Pitts and someone that could be a good stacking opportunity, being that I also drafted Jaden Daniels, and then ended my draft with 2 upside players with Troy Franklin out of Denver and then Jahan Dotson. And then now when we look over at my second scenario, I actually went with more of a anchor running back approach. And the way that this works is within my first 2 picks, I actually go for an elite running back that I believe can be a workhorse. And in this case, after taking CeeDee Lamb again at the 103, I then instead took ETN at the 210. In this range of the second round, ETN is one of the last few workhorse running backs that can be elite. And the main thing that makes him elite not only is his efficiency, but also his usage in the passing game. Last season, he actually was 6th among running backs in routes run. He also was 4th in yards created, and him being available there in the second round to couple with CeeDee Lamb, I think is a great 1-2 punch. And then as you can see, I then went with making sure that I'm shoring up my pass catchers with Mike Evans, who's going to be the number 1 there in Tampa Bay. And I then went with DK Metcalf, who I believe is being slightly overlooked, especially considering that I believe that Seattle's going to take a step forward with the improvements that they made at offensive coordinator. I then went with Dalton Kincaid, and then I went with Ramondre Stevenson. And the reason why I'm big on Stevenson here in this range is because, number 1, I believe he is the ideal running back 2, especially in what we call this dead zone. Last season, he had 9 games where he saw 60% of the snaps, and in those games, he actually averaged 14.8 fantasy points. And just for context, if you were to actually stretch that in a full 17 game season, that would actually make him a RB14 option, and he's going as late as the 6th round as we're seeing in this scenario. I believe that he is a great pairing there with ETN as my 1-2 at the running back position. I then went with Dak Prescott here in the 7th round to now complete my stack with CeeDee Lamb, and then I got Deontay Johnson to go into my flex spot, who I believe is going to be really effective in that Carolina offense, because I believe that they're going to make a lot of strides in the right direction, being that they of course are looking to bolster up that offense behind Bryce Young under center. And then what I did was I went with 3 straight running backs that I believe could be safe insurance picks and also can be high upside ones as well, going with Jalen Warren, Chase Brown, Zach Charbonnet to go behind, of course, Kenneth Walker. And then I did the same thing once again, getting Troy Franklin, but I also coupled it with Rashid Shaheed. And then I went with Isaiah Likely, someone that could be valuable if anything was to happen to Mark Andrews. And there also was reports about how Likely is getting a lot of usage in that Baltimore offense, despite being the second tight end on that depth chart. Now, to fast forward, I'm now going to go to my 3rd scenario, and in this one I went for more of a double anchor running back. Now, I made a video about this exact strategy. I'll link it over here as well to go more in depth, but just to kind of breeze through it real fast, the way it works is you get a elite pass catcher and you try to secure 2 running backs in your first 3 picks. So in this scenario, instead of going with CeeDee Lamb, being that he was picked 1st overall in this mock draft, and then of course CMC going right after, I went with Tyreek Hill. And what I did was I then was able to couple it with the home run hitting Devon Achane. And I know that there's a lot of reservations about Devon Achane, especially because of how crazy his efficiency was last season, but I just believe that he still has that league winning upside, and for him to be available there at the tail end of the 2nd round, I mean, I feel really good with that. I mean, he was number 1 in fantasy points per opportunity, he was number 1 in expected points as well, and he also of course was number 1 in yards created per touch. And to then couple that with Isaiah Pacheco, who I believe in the 3rd round is a huge steal. And for Pacheco, it's as simple as this: he's part of a great Kansas City offense that is going to utilize him. He was 8th last season in opportunity share, and from weeks 4 to week 18, he actually averaged 18.6 touches per game, playing 65% of the snaps. And there's this great quote from Andy Reid that he shared earlier this month that he says that Pacheco can do it all, and you should expect to see him getting utilized in so many different ways in this offense. And once again, that 3rd round price being such a phenomenal value. And after I went with my 2 running backs, I then invested in getting Trey McBride, being that he was there available late in the 4th round. And then I was able to couple him with 2 straight wide receivers with George Pickens and Rashid Rice. I was beyond ecstatic because in the 7th round, I was able to then get Kyler Murray to then complete the stack with Trey McBride. And of course, beyond the stack is the amount of upside that you're able to get with Murray being a running quarterback. And I then went with Christian Watson to be there in my flex, and then I coupled it with a few more upside running back picks, as well as a rookie running back with Xavier Legette, with Jalen Warren, Ezekiel Elliott, who could potentially be the number 1, even though you're hearing of course murmurs of Rico Dowell really doing well this offseason. And I also got J.K. Dobbins. I mean, of course, this is a Los Angeles Chargers offense that is expected to be run heavy, and it hasn't been really definitive that Gus Edwards is going to take that job away, but being that J.K. Dobbins is there available in the 12th round, I'll be happy there. And then I went with Sennett as well as Ricky Pearsall to complete this scenario. In this final scenario, I went with more of a robust running back strategy. I'm actually going to link a video that I did a couple years ago that really did well, that goes over the theory of what the strategy is all about. But essentially, you just go heavy at the running back position within the early rounds. And I went with Bijan Robinson with the 103 as opposed to going for a wide receiver, as you saw in the first couple scenarios with CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill. And at the turn, I was able to then come back and get Devon Achane. And then at the 3-3, I then went with Brandon Ayuk to be my first wide receiver. And on the way back to close out the fourth round, I went with Kenneth Walker. And I'm big on Kenneth Walker as a great option. And then, of course, once again, we're in that dangerous, what we call a dead zone at the running back position, being that he's in the fourth round. But I just love Brian Grubb now being the offensive coordinator there. I mean, this offense is going to see an uptick in usage, and I believe that Kenneth Walker is someone that is now getting involved a lot more in the passing game. Last season, he was 4th in yards per reception, and also he was 3rd in innovative tackles, and he's just a home run hitting running back. And to get him there in the fourth round was, I believe, a really, really great value. And then what I did was, after getting my 3 running backs in my first 4 rounds, I then was able to then get a positional advantage by making sure I got Mark Andrews. I then was able to couple Brandon Ayuk with Calvin Ridley, and then I went with Kyler Murray there as my quarterback once again, trying to get as much of a positional advantage in 2 key spots with Mark Andrews as well as Kyler Murray. And then, of course, Brian Thomas and Christian Watson. Once again, you're seeing Christian Watson, someone that I'm drafting a lot in my mock draft, so that should give you a hint. Once again, going with Chase Brown, and then going for upside with Adonai Mitchell out of the Colts, and then Rashid Shaheed there in New Orleans, and then of course Sennett, and then Tracy at the running back position for the New York Giants. And this just, I believe, just showcases how I'm now banking on my running backs being the ones that will carry my team, pun intended, to fantasy success. And these are just 4 different scenarios that, again, not all these strategies, I just want to make sure that I'm clearly emphasizing this point. Your home leagues are going to look very different. You should know your league makes tendencies, and part of that actually is going to affect how you're going to draft. And this video was more so to show you 4 different scenarios, being that I'm in 2 different leagues where I'm going to be picking early on in the draft, and I know that each league is very different. There's some players in my league that actually draft running back heavy early, and with that, I believe these scenarios give you the opportunity to see a template where you can zig when others zag. Thank you so much for making it to the very end of this video. If you found value in it, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe and join the family here as well at the Ivan Herrera Show. And be sure to check out some of these other videos where I'm actually sharing with you players that you should be avoiding and players that you should be drafting in your upcoming fantasy football leagues.